Hey guys, Tom here from the Investing with Tom YouTube channel. Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoyed today's video, hit like, hit subscribe, and that way you can see future videos as well. So on this channel, we obviously talk about investing. The channel name is Investing with Tom, so that makes a whole lot of sense. But one of the things you need, obviously, to get started investing is cash, is savings to actually put to work into your investments, so that when you find opportunities, you can, put a reasonable percentage of your net worth to work and actually make some sort of substantial difference in your net worth over time, hopefully, with those investments. So a big part of that is actually saving money in the first place, and it's something I don't think I probably give enough attention to on the channel. So I want to spend a bit of time today talking about my top money saving tips. It's the same topic of a video I did close to a year ago now, called How I Save 50% of My Income. And in the video I said this one, and I'm going to give you a few of my top tips, some of my best sort of money saving tips that I've used personally to save close to 50% of my after-tax income over the last 12 months. And I actually went through and sort of did some of the numbers on how close to 50% I actually was at that time. And it turned out I was at around a 45.9% savings rate. So maybe the title was slightly clickbaity there, but I was pretty close to 50%. And basically what's happened since, in roughly that year, not quite a year since that time, my savings rate has actually increased to a little over 60% now. So I want to talk through some of the things that I've done. Largely the principles are very, very similar, identical in fact to what I talked about in the first video, but I think it's worth reiterating and giving you my sort of top tips on saving a large proportion of your income, particularly when you compare that to the average savings rate in New Zealand, which is around 8 or 9% of your income at the moment. So disclaimer to this video is I do have some things in my life that allow me to save a lot more money than the average person. So I'm a renter, I don't own my own home, and I don't have kids, are probably the big two that often come up. So now that that's out of the way, many of the same principles are going to apply regardless of what your sort of situation is in those two categories. But I want to get into it and give you my top 5 money saving tips and how I've been able to move my savings rate up from about 45% to about 60% of my after-tax income now. So let's get into that. So the first of my 5 tips for saving more money and increasing your savings rate is the oldest trick in the book for personal finance, and something that you will have heard probably a million times, but the reason you've heard it so much is because it works, quite frankly. And that is something called paying yourself first. Now, paying yourself first is a pretty simple concept. So the way that most people tend to approach their finances is they get paid every week or every fortnight or every month or however often they get paid, and what they'll do is they will pay their bills, they will spend some money going out on the weekends, buy some new clothes, do whatever they want to do with kind of spending their money. And then what they will do is they'll look at what's kind of left in the pie after they've spent all the money that they want to, and then they might save a little bit of that away. That's kind of the traditional approach, and that in my mind and in a lot of people's minds that really focus on this stuff is the complete opposite way to think about it. So what paying yourself first means is that when money hits your bank account from being paid from your job or whatever your source of income is, what you do is you take a dollar figure from that paycheck, you put it straight into another account so that you never see that in your everyday spending account. So if you get paid, say, $1,000 a week and you want to save, 300 of that or whatever the numbers are for you, as soon as that $1,000 turns up in your bank account, you are going to send that $300 directly to savings and investing kind of accounts, and just be left with that $700, so that you never actually see that extra $300 and you're not sort of tempted to spend it. So as simple as that sounds, it is extremely effective, and that is for a couple of reasons. So firstly, it makes you disciplined and very consistent. So when you set this system up, you can go back and have a look at your savings account, and you can see these very, very consistent deposits of the same amount every single week or fortnight. And it makes goal setting very, very easy, which is one of the other things we're going to talk about shortly. So that's one of the reasons I really like it. And frankly, if you get rid of some money from your everyday spending accounts, as soon as possible, you are quite likely to spend a little bit less. So that's the first tip. Extremely effective, tried and true, kind of old school personal finance tip, but probably one of the best things I ever did for trying to save more money. So that is tip number 1. Let's get into tip number 2. Now, tip number 2, and probably the thing that has helped me accelerate my savings rate the most dramatically over the last 12 months is avoiding something called lifestyle creep. So lifestyle creep is a pretty simple concept. Basically, what it is if you put yourself in the situation of, let's say, a university student where your income is very, very limited, and you're even having to take on debt to sort of fund your studies and that sort of thing. So for most people, when they're living that lifestyle, they live on a very tight budget. So they don't typically go out to fancy restaurants as uni students, as many of you will probably know. They will certainly probably go to the bars, but nonetheless, they are they're very restricted in terms of the things they choose to do and things they choose not to do, simply because money is very tight and you don't have the funds available to do a lot of those things. So when people typically move out of that situation and they start to get a little bit more income, what tends to happen is that their spending also goes up accordingly. So if they get a raise of, say, $100 a fortnight, for most people, they're actually going to go out and probably start to spend an extra $100 a fortnight. And for a lot of people, it won't actually kind of click in their brain that they've made this lifestyle adjustment. They will do this over a period of time. Let's say you start working at 20 and all of a sudden you're 30. You've had a few pay rises in between. The 30-year-old self is very likely to look back at the 20-year-old self and say, whoa, I've actually made a huge amount of lifestyle changes. I wouldn't have ever gone out to these restaurants when I was 20. I wouldn't have ever gone on these extravagant holidays when I was 20. I wouldn't have ever spent these things that are now quite regular occurrences in my sort of everyday spending. So avoiding lifestyle creep and avoiding that, keeping up with the Joneses type thinking is something that's very, very powerful for saving more money. So, for example, if you do get that extra $100 a fortnight pay increase, the way I approach that is I now have an extra $100 to put straight towards savings and investments because, number one, that's what I'm passionate about, and number two, that's what I really want to build as quickly as possible to get to financial freedom like everyone would love to do. So that's the way I think about it, and avoiding lifestyle creep and avoiding, the pressure to kind of keep up with what the typical person is doing is very, very powerful. So that is tip number 2. Let's get into tip number 3. So tip number 3 for saving more money is counter to a lot of the thinking with what you'll see on everyday kind of personal finance channels, and that is to focus on the big expenses in your life. So what you'll hear oftentimes when you watch videos like this is you'll hear people talk about how the Netflix subscriptions and now the Disney Plus subscriptions and those sort of things can add up, and they can turn into a lot of money spent over a year or a few years and over a lifetime. So that is very true, but all that said, I tend to think that the major progress can be made from the larger expenses in your life. So things like housing, things like transport, how do you get from A to B? I think those tend to have a lot more wiggle room than the $10 or $15 a month you're spending on subscriptions for streaming services and stuff like that. So those are the things that I focus on, and that is actually one of the big reasons that I've been able to increase my savings rate this year is the transport one. So I was fortunate enough to in my job get to the point where I'm able to have a company vehicle. So previous to that, I was driving a Holden Commodore, which will not surprise many of you knowing that I'm from Hamilton and probably think I'm a bit of a bogan or something. But I was driving a Holden Commodore, not the most cheap fuel efficient car in the world to run, and I've simply been able to avoid fueling that now that I have a company vehicle. So focusing on those big things, I know that's obviously not an easy option for many of you, but focusing on how can I get the major expenses in my life down, like transportation, like housing, all those sorts of things is a very powerful one. So although the little things can add up, and if you have lots of these little expenses, it can turn into something significant, I think the real area where you can make a lot of headway is not buying the new cars, not going on the fancy vacations, buy an old Toyota Corolla, travel locally, go for the more cost-effective options if this is something that is really important to you, is getting to financial freedom as quickly as possible. So focus on the big stuff. The little, expenses matter, but it's the big expenses in your life where you can really make a lot of headway. So the fourth tip on saving more money is something that I am personally a huge fan of doing, and that is simply goal setting. And if you have done the first 3 steps in this video really well, goal setting becomes actually quite easy. So in my personal situation, basically what I do is at the start of each calendar year, I will go ahead and I will set a savings target. So that'll be a dollar figure that I want to save over the coming 12 months. And what I do is I decide on what that number is. I personally get paid fortnightly, so I chop that number into 26, divide it by 26, because that's about the amount of payments I'm going to get throughout a year from my everyday job. And then I figure out how much I'm going to have to save each fortnight to actually get to that number. And when you're setting your lifestyle up in this sort of pay yourself type situation, it makes it very, very easy to start to set up some of these goals. So if you know that you need to save $100 a week, or $200 or $500 or $1,000 or $100,000 a week, that'd be great. whatever your number is, whatever you need to save per week, if you can figure out what that number is and you've got a consistent source of income to get to that, all that you really need to do is kind of execute on it. So I love to set goals. It's very, very satisfying to me when I get to the end of the year and I have met a goal, or I've even exceeded it, which has happened a few times. So I'm big on goals, not too much more to say on that one other than do them, and it's much easier to meet them if you can set up the pay yourself first kind of mentality and see those consistent kind of deposits coming into those savings and investment accounts every single fortnight. So the fifth and final personal finance tip for saving more money is a pretty simple one, and it is to increase your income. And I know this is one that a lot of people will struggle to do anything with quite quickly, but I want to run you through some of the things that I've done over the last year to get to that point. So the big one and the most obvious one is what you're watching right now. So is YouTube. I've been able to get monetized on YouTube over the last few months. That has been my side hustle for sort of well over a year now to kind of get it to where it is at this point. So there was a lot of kind of upfront grunt work, but now it's at the point where it's starting to actually produce some income. So it's doing about $500 or $600 or so a month now at this point, which by no means is a life-changing amount of money for a lot of people. But like I said, when I'm paying myself first and I'm avoiding lifestyle creep, any extra income is kind of cream on top for my savings. So I have a certain kind of amount of dollars that I need to live with my current lifestyle, and any dollar over and above that has a savings rate of 100%, basically. So if I can get this YouTube channel to the point where it's doing $1,000 a month or a couple of $1,000s a month, that's $1,000 or a couple of $1,000s a month that is instantly going to be saved and invested. So that's the way I like to think about things. So in terms of what you can do, side hustles are huge. Everyone seems to have a side hustle at this point, but it's definitely worth the time if you do have some time available in your day to go after, not necessarily YouTube if you don't think that's your thing, but whatever you can offer value to the outside world, whatever way you can do that and think you can monetize that, even if it takes some grunt work up front, that's definitely something worth looking into. So that's one way I've been able to increase my income. There's a gazillion videos on how people all across the world have been able to do that, but that's kind of been the big one for me. The second one is I have got increased salary at my job. So I've been slowly, moving up the ranks, I guess, with my career and what I'm doing there. And same kind of deal. So any extra income that comes in from my everyday job, all goes straight to extra savings. That's just kind of the way I've got my life set up currently. I'm in my mid-20s. I don't have a huge amount of financial responsibility, and I'm really taking as much advantage of those current circumstances as I can to kind of set myself up well for when I do have more financial responsibility later in my life. So those are my top 5 tips for saving more money, and that's the basic formula for how I have managed to shift my own savings rate from about 45% of my after-tax income to up around 60% of my after-tax income. So I hope it was useful. Having money is obviously very helpful if you're trying to invest some money. So I hope it was useful. If it was, please hit like, hit subscribe. If you've got any other personal finance tips that I have missed that have really helped you out, definitely drop them down in the comments below. I would love to hear them. But that's all from me today. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit like, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.